I am honored to have Judy Juanita here. I'm incredibly impressed by her new book. I had you guys read like something from Virgin Soul, which what you're reading from, by the way, is this book, 2013, which is her first novel. But before this, you did many plays, you published poetry, and you're working on all three of those genres still. I learned about that from this book, which is brand new, brand spanking new, which is more essay-like, but you can't like take the literary out of Judy Juanita. This is not just straight essays. Like the one where she talks about being a stand-up comic. It's like punctuated with with little stand-up comic bits, kind of set off in like bars, and. So that, and there'll be essays in here that like in the middle of it there'll be a poem. And it's a beautiful range of essays, and it's also sort of chronologically arranged. Biographically arranged, in a sense. Like this brilliant essay about the gun as performance art is placed in a certain place in the narrative of the book, but it kind of starts in the present, like the cultural present, and in veers, through all these different terrains. So to read it strictly as a narrative in the sense that this book is, I think would be, I wouldn't look for it that way. I would look at it as a book of essays, but it does offer the advantages of also being, having a narrative to it and a spiritual coming of age. And because Miss Juanita there aren't too many, writers who have published a novel in the last several years whose first, real major publication was as the editor of the Black Panther newspaper in 1967 too. And one also gets the sense too that, that legacy was there. And I love the way you write an essay like looking back over the Black Panthers, and then you actually include your juvenilia in this book. I don't know if juvenilia is the right word, but
what is that?
the essay you wrote when you were 21 years old.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. In 1967, she includes an essay that she wrote for the Black Panther newspaper in this, and it's really intense. I felt that by reading that essay, I got more of a internal sense of like what was going on in that time period than I do by reading all these historical accounts and or watching that silly PBS movie that came out last year, that Vanguard of the Revolution. And it really and it gives, because it's also like the history of the Black Panthers. I think it's starting to come out more. Like we had our Women in the Struggle thing over in the art gallery. But I think that it's, Judy's really shedding light on that, and but you also have this beautiful attitude of detachment, like, yeah, been there, done that, but that's just part of who I am. That's not, Judy's interest in the Black Panthers too. Like Judy operated at the intersection of activism and being an artist, and there was always that sense in there, And that sense that it's not just the Black Panthers that are getting a lot of hype right now, but it's also the Black arts movement, which, those of you who know Marvin X, for instance, who's definitely still trying to get a Black arts district going on 14th Street and demands reparations from the city for what they did to 7th Street. That aspect of it as a writer and as an artist, realizing that one of the most revolutionary things to come out of the Black Panthers. I've always, one of my Black Panther heroes has always been Erica Huggins because of the schools and because of what her vision of a school. But your vision as a writer in the Black Panther Party, as, newspaper being, having an effect on the world in a way that, our writing, I think every creative writer, is, what's the distinction between a creative writer and a non-creative writer? I think Judy navigates that in a brilliant way that very few people have mastered. And I also think that knowing more about the Black Arts Movement and what the Black Arts Movement was and is, and passing that legacy on, which is the
part of what we're talking about tonight, and part of why Chris invited me was so that I could talk about what it was like to become a writer and what it was like to go through this whole trajectory of teaching and writing. Okay? So when I was around, I'm 70 now, but when I was around 28, I made a decision, oh my gosh, I am not going to work in any profession that takes away from my writing. The profession I work in has to contribute to it. It has to, aid and abet it. And of course, I knew that teaching was part of that. So part of what goes on in the book, in my writing in de facto feminism, is I'm trying to really show how hard it was to stick to that decision and how I did it, and how I navigated my way. And the original title was Labyrinthine because I felt like I was going through a labyrinth. So I don't know if this is your first writing workshop. For some of you, is this your first writing workshop? Okay. But part of the book is about how writing workshops have a hierarchy in them, and you have to kind of fight your way through them. But I think that writing workshops are the reason why I developed as a writer. I know they are, and I stayed in writing workshops for decades. I took one after the other, 1 year after another, because they were so helpful. And also the thing about writing workshops is that you get artificial deadlines, okay? The deadline is turn this in, have your work done by, and I would always have mine done by, whatever the date was. And so many of my friends would say, I don't know how you do it, but they didn't, I guess they couldn't fathom that it was so important for me to get some kind of feedback, because I feel like writing is like an army. Being a writer is like being in the army, and your family and your friends, they're like civilians, and they don't quite understand, but people in writing workshops, they understand struggling with the written word. They understand feeling, yes, rejected by a rejection letter, but either tearing it up or pasting it in an album and keeping on trucking, because you just are not going to let it stop you. So I was a fellow in the Robert Frierson playwriting workshop at the Lorraine Hansberry Theater in San Francisco in 1991, when I learned some golden lessons about myself and writing. My journaling, I always keep journals, whether I write in them once a week or twice a week, but now I actually have a very tiny one with small pages, and I write in it every day because I don't have to write a lot because it's so small. But I end up, scribbling in it very regularly. My journaling helped me understand that I learned through making big fat mistakes versus reading and perfecting in my mind. The main trade secret I keep getting is that theater operates as a closed shop, but the one other entry is perfected skill. My main reason for taking so many workshops is to keep writing. I'm trying to see where I should put my primary emphasis, poetry, fiction, or plays. And then another one is, oh boy, writers need support systems badly. And then being mentored by extraordinary people is a strong theme in my work and life. So Stanley, he was the head of the Lorraine Hansberry Theater. He is now deceased, bless his soul. He came in the first night and he spoke to all the fellows. He shook the guys' hands and not mine. I was the only woman present. He avoided my eyes and couldn't remember my name. I seem to recall this kind of chummy, cliquey attitude in theater before. Circles are closed until you break through. Our esteemed playwright leader, R, hardly talked about tonight's subject, plot, and structure. Instead, he sounded on how he hadn't gotten paid yet from Lorraine Hansberry Theater. When Stanley left, R and the others dissed him. So the men didn't like him either. The next week, 2 more women were there, a relief. Stanley ignored me again. He spoke to the other women. Maybe he's not a misogynist. I noticed one thing about this workshop, which was so hard to get in, so very, very selective. It wasn't making me productive. Nina, the sculptor, and I talked a lot because we were always on time and R was always late. I liked her. She was from the Midwest, like my college roomie. I love Midwesterners. I connect with their dry humor. That's the chair of my department. He's a Midwesterner. R talked about the Henry Tanner play he was writing. I liked that he gave up a lot of information about the theater. He deglamorized it. When he got the San Francisco Bay Guardian Award, he was driving a cab, one cliche I never want to experience. Cleaning condos for 2 years was enough for my bones. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of skip over some things just to get to the point of, so I brought in my play, and this one person didn't like it. I got tons of suggestions, really explicit on my play. Once I got home, I saw that Nate hated it. That hurt. I took his copy out the next day and studied it. The next class he said, I have real problems with this play, but said he had written them down and it wasn't necessary to go over them twice. Everybody's eyebrows rose. He didn't like the play or me. So P, and this is actually Philip Khan Gotunda, a very esteemed Asian playwright. He was our guest playwright. Boy, was he interesting. A real careerist in a laid-back, sure-footed way. He talked about being the right place, the right time, the right person for Asian work. He was the one. It was interesting to hear him and R talk about the LA theater scene. So much is dependent on knowing the right person who likes your work and you, the chummies. On balance, this workshop was more discouraging than not, and at one point, I put, the main trade secret that I keep getting is that theater is a closed shop, but that the one entry is through perfected skill. We went for drinks, all of us, afterward. That helped. Liquor loosens things. P, the Asian guy, spoke bluntly about being a token. Let's not fool ourselves, he said. The conversation got a bit tight as P revealed he'd gotten some of that luscious screenwriting money that R was always talking about. So many branches in the writing world. I don't know where to perch. Seems like a man's world to me. Maybe that's why the femme lesbians decided to go off and do their own thing. Yeah, so I just wanted to read up to that, So I had I just had a ton of experiences with writing. When I first came to Laney, Adam David Miller is a poet, and he was an instructor here, and he gave me the most valuable advice. He said, send your work out. Send it out. Don't hold it in. Send it out, send it out, send it out. And he said that way, once it's out, you can work on something else. And I found that to be so useful. That was in 1993, 94 when I first came here. Adam David Miller was at the book party for Virgin Soul. He was by then in his 90s, and he was very supportive. And then I during the festivities and while I was talking, I mentioned Adam and what he had said to me. And Adam said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you the other half of that." I said, "Well, what is that?" And he said, "When your work reaches critical mass, then you will get recognition." Is that deep? I was so happy that I didn't hear that other half back then, because then I would have been looking for, where's critical mass? When have I reached critical mass? And instead, frankly speaking, I really just thought it was never going to happen for me after a while. And I just said, oh, okay. And I used to call myself to myself, Emily Dickinson, you know. I mean, I just thought, okay, I'm just writing. Maybe someday, 100 years from now, maybe somebody's going to read it, However, that's kind of one really kind of way over here spectrum of my attitude. Obviously, I kept writing and I kept sending off and I kept getting published. But in the writing world, where I was getting published, as Chris knows, is called obscure journals, right? Chris, however, has a long string of publications in,
Mostly obscure journals.
but he made the big ones too.
Yes.
American Poetry Review, right? Okay. And he actually was an editor at a magazine there where I got published, but I don't even have a copy of it anymore.
I lost all. Well, I
Yeah,
I
the
used to
Painted,
have the whole
the Painted
series.
Bride Quarterly out of Philly. I was a journalist first, so that was my training, writing for newspapers, and I was actually a journalism major when I was a student here at Oakland City College. They called it language arts. You couldn't say journalism, but it was language arts. And then I transferred to San Francisco State. When I got to San Francisco State, I just felt like I've had enough of journalism, and I wasn't learning enough. But I didn't have enough cojones, is that what it is, to major in English, because my really good friend was named George Murray, and he's a historic figure in the Black Panther Party.
Yeah.
Okay, George Mason Murray, the right-wing talk show host used to say his name the same way they now say Barack Hussein Obama. They used to say George Mason Murray because George was giving these fiery speeches throughout the state of California. But anyway, George was an English major. He subsequently got a PhD from Stanford. But he would show me his papers, and his papers were like C pluses. And I thought, George is a genius, and if George is getting C pluses, I'm not majoring in English. I want to graduate, So instead I chose psychology, which totally kicked my butt. I had to take all of this statistics courses, which so anyway, very difficult. Yeah. So life sometimes is pay me now or pay me later. So I had to learn all the stuff. I should have been an English, not should have, but I turned into an English major anyway, because for the next 20 years after college, I just gave myself my own BA degree in English. I just studied what I needed to study. And the first time I got in front of a classroom, 5 days after I got my BA degree, and I was a college teacher, all because of the militancy that I was involved in. We established the department, we put ourselves in the positions until about a year or two later when the PhDs came along and took the positions. But we did that. But the first thing I knew right away was, oh my God, I don't know anything. And for maybe the next 20 years in teaching, thank goodness I had the stamina, but oftentimes I'd stay up all night reading a novel, just staying ahead of my students, that much ahead of my students. Stay up all night reading, stay up all weekend read, that kind of thing. So, yeah, there was a lot to learn, but journalism was a good place to start. Ernest Hemingway says journalism is a good place to start, and Philani Davis, a writer, says that all writers should know poetry. I think her quote is this one. I put this together a few years ago. Every time I have a reading or a conference, I just pull together a booklet, and just put it together. And I'll just frankly say, sometimes I put it together for my students here at Laney, and then I just keep some copies for myself, Okay, but you have to bring something. You have to tell yourself you're a writer a lot of times, not other people, So Philani Davis says, being a poet is the only real foundation for being able to move from prose to theater or story to opera. Being a poet makes it easy to edit your own articles, to keep cutting the rhetoric even when it sounds really good. Being a poet makes it enjoyable to write a film, which is exquisitely economical. For a prose writer, film could be excruciating. Okay? Being a poet is to understand that words can convey ideas and music. You know? But writing in an American voice allows you to play percussion as well. Yeah, Fulani Davis. Yeah, so let's keep opening it up.
Well,
Yeah.
Are there any other questions anybody had for Judy or comments?
Yes, ma'am.
I know that you were a journal for the Black Panthers. What kind of things did you talk about? Like, were you discussing, like, what was happening at that very moment? Like, what kind of things did you write about during that time?
Okay, so this is very interesting. My roommates and I joined the Black Panther Party. We were the first students from San Francisco State to join the party. And then they called us the Sisters with Skills, and we each went to a different area. One worked in accounting, one worked with Bobby Seale as his scheduler, one worked running the office. I worked on the paper with Eldridge Cleaver and Kathleen Cleaver. There was very little writing that I had to do, very little writing. Actually, I did a lot of lettering because at that point, this was in the late 60s, it was called something like Instaprint or Instatype, and we'd actually take it and press it down and letter out the headlines and get the paper ready for the press. Huey and Eldridge turned out so much writing. All I did was bring it in, set it, I did not write, okay? I did not know what being an editor was going to be like. But what happened was there was the shootout when little Bobby Hutton got killed. This is all on the on the whole 3-day period when Martin Luther King was assassinated also. So it was a very tragic time. Well, Eldridge was imprisoned. Huey was already in jail. So Huey reorganized the party because so many people were in jail. And we had this meeting, and that's in Virgin Soul. We had this meeting in Mosswood Park. And I had worked on the newspapers at Oakland City College with Huey and Bobby and had interviewed them for stories. So out of this tape recorder comes this voice saying all these appointments. And I want Judy Hart to be the editor-in-chief of the paper. She's a Together sister, and I remember her work and I trust her, or whatever, from City College. Well, I just nearly fainted, So everything changed in my life at that instant. However, I became the editor-in-chief. Many people, probably 5 or 6 or more people occupied that slot. We didn't last for long, But during that time, that was when the Panthers exploded internationally and became well known. So we did when you were in the party, you did everything. So it wasn't like I sat up and just thought of great things to write about. Not at all. Everything came into me and I pretty much helped arrange it. That was more or less my job. And I think I say it on page, let me keep going over there. One of Billy Jennings, you met Billy X?
Yeah, I met
Yeah,
him.
he said, they said all the Panther stuff starts on page 200. So, so I said on here what I did there. Okay, it is on page 200. I signed and joined the BPP because the party's indignation and cry for self-determination matched my own. It took me a while to see that, to feel that. When I did, I became a member and went through basic training, PE classes, PE meaning political education, weapon handling, setting up rallies at different colleges and schools, disseminating important position papers and quotes to the media outlets, both alternative and mainstream. I began seeing the world of the Black Panther Party in every utterance around me. It was like a torrent. Eventually, I became an editor at the Black Panther Party. I thought I'd renounced journalism with my disgust at the Gator. The Gator was the San Francisco State paper, which I thought was so white. But like a persistent ex-lover, journalism kept showing up at my doorstep looking for action. This is how we put out the party intercommunal news service. We got documents, position papers, and editorials from Huey Bobby Eldridge, who was the Minister of Information, or George Murray, the Minister of Education. And George was a friend of mine from Castlemont High. We had known each other since childhood, since adolescence. George, who was a fellow student at State, had handwriting that drove me absolutely nuts. Pages and pages, since he was a genius, of course, of chicken scratching that took me hours to transcribe. That was one of my jobs, okay? There were endorsements, poems, and reports of police brutality and repression from all over the Bay Area, then from all over the United States. Some needed retyping and proofreading, which I did. Many we were able to reproduce directly. Emery, the artist, did the entire layout and the editorial cartoons. Huey's picture front and center, his eyes above the fold always, you know, the fold in the newspaper. Here's the top, you know, in journalism, you know, here's the front page, and this is called the fold, so this is above the fold. So Huey's eyes, Huey's picture front and center, his eyes above the fold always, glistening with black defiance. Once we were through, we hand carried it to the printer. When we got it back, we sold it alongside the rank and file for $0.25. My eyes and ears took in so much. So that gives you an idea of, you know, what we were doing. You know, so it wasn't people think of the party as glamorous and the icons. It was fun and it was interesting, but there was a lot more going on than people standing around with a rifle. So 2 other people had questions. You had a question? Oh, okay. Yes, ma'am.
Did you say PE was personal empowerment?
No, political education.
Political education?
Yeah, we read Wretched of the Earth, Marxism texts, historical texts. Yeah.
And are you a teacher here?
Yes, yeah, I teach at Laney. I've been here 23 years.
So,
English.
would you say that your first impulse is poetry? Was poetry there?
Yes,
Was that the first
yes,
writing that came out of
yes,
you?
yes.
So that's your foundation, and then kind of have to try to make a living with writing, so journalism was...
No, journalism, I wrote journalism. I was in journalism classes from the time I was in junior high school. So I was always with the journalism kids. You know how you get with the drama kids so I was always writing stories. I always had a narrative bent, okay? But then when I seriously took up writing, you know, when I was 20, you know, and decided I want to be a writer, and I carried a notebook around with me, then I was writing poems. So I've kind of jumped from genre to genre. And I think in each one I keep polishing and learning more. You know, and for me, for a long time, it was a buffet, you know, and I just, you know, I wanted to learn all these things, all these different ways of writing. Basically, I think maybe some of the others who are writers in the room, and Chris, American writers sometimes are encouraged just to write in your genre. But in many other countries like Voorhees, Neruda, so forth, people write, you know, they write in many different forms. They write in many different genres, and they're expected to. And they also become like, what was it, Václav Havel? What's his name? Václav Havel. They go into politics, you know, and sometimes they're killed for it. You know?
Yeah, well, I think that's, one of the legacies in some ways of the Black Arts Movement because, I mean, for me, even as a white person, Baraka's paradigm, for me, it was like, this is the internationalist public intellectual, and Ish does it too,
Yes,
But
yeah.
is that Ishmael Reed, whose play we did earlier?
Uncle Ish.
Yeah, but and and I think that in America you really got to fight for that, and that's one of the reasons why I actually really like this class is because in this class we have to write all genres, and in fact, I wrote an essay recently about why this has advantages over when I taught in an MFA program over at St. Mary's. I had to be. It was like there was the poets and there was the fiction and the nonfiction people. Now, as a student, you could theoretically take, but you had to choose one. And I feel like that the over-specialization is a problem in this country.
I think so.
And one of the great, what makes Judy's book so heroic is that you see, you're navigating this fragmented world to try to, put these different genres together.
Yeah.
And create. But I wanted to ask you one follow-up question, kind of based on something you had said earlier. See, when you read the excerpt from Virgin Soul just now, which is not one of the ones we Xeroxed, but really, I remember when I read that, I was, always had that question in my mind, if this is just the character, but you read it right now as straight, transparent,
Yes.
autobiography.
Yes.
So, is there anything more you want to say about that, like the
Yes.
way that you weave
Yes.
moments in that book that are straight from your life that could be in the new book?
This is a document. This is a document. I wrote this knowing that this story hadn't been told. Okay? A couple of things happened as I was writing it. First of all, the first draft that I turned into my literary agent, Fred Hill at the time, got this reaction from him. He said, this book's going to follow you the rest of your life. You've got to get it right. Boy, and I just bristled. But when I came home, I thought about that, And so I went back and I did more research, and I was determined to do the best job that I could. So one of the things that I had to do then was I had to cut out the San Francisco State strike part. Okay, I couldn't cover both stories in one novel. Okay, I had to figure out, and that's what I had been trying to do when I had this 600-page, 650-page. I was trying to cover too many bases, and I had to narrow it down.
Were you very involved with the San Francisco student strike?
Of course, yes, I was.
Because that is absent, yes.
Yes. No, that's why I had to set a parameter here, and the parameter was 1964 to 1968. Okay. No, I mean, it's just part of deciding what you can do, because I was lost in the archives at Merritt College. Merritt College had the archives from Huey and Bobby's time at Oakland City College, and the archives there, they were kept by a nurse at Merritt College who just liked going to all of the rallies and all of the events, and she kept all of these flyers and so forth from memorabilia from the time, from the 60s and the 70s. So when I went up to the archive at Merritt, I just nearly died. First of all, I found out, what an archive is. It's just a bunch of boxes, a bunch of dusty boxes, I mean, I thought it was something fancy, but they hadn't sorted it out yet when I went up there. And she had just dumped all this stuff in a big box and said, here, this is really important for history one day, and gave it to the library at Merritt. Then I did the same thing with the archive at San Francisco State, and then I did the same thing with the Huey P. Newton archives at Stanford. I didn't put it in here. I put it in other places. Well, believe me, I was overloaded at that point. I was definitely overloaded, and I had to refocus. I had to get a better focus. And it was very painful to cut out the San Francisco stage strike stuff, but it was another chapter. It was another book. It's another book.
How did you navigate the balance that Virgin Soul achieves between I'll just, for lack of better words right now, or just for shorthand, the personal and the political, like
Okay.
the public and the
agent really helped me with that.
Mhm.
The agent, first of all, the Black House is what sold the novel. It's what got me the agent, the chapter on the Black House. And he told
where
me.
the woman says you're beautiful. I think.
Yes,
Yeah. Right. Okay,
right,
yeah.
right.
I think we did that
Yeah,
chapter.
yeah. The agent said, whenever you go into the fictional, because that was totally fictional, whenever you go into the fictional, he said it pops. He said, when you do the straight historical,
It's flat.
he said it's just not as interesting. And you know something? My roomie from that time, Janice, who became, and I mentioned her in the end, who was Bobby Seale's scheduler. She's a reader. And when I sent her one of the first advanced review copies, and she said, Judy, basically she said, I thought it was all going to be so political, but she said, but I whiz through the political parts so I can get back to crazy Janice and all those crazy decisions she makes, so, and I wasn't crazy like that. I was, I was kind of silly, but I wasn't crazy. I didn't make, I was very much into survival, but I used that craziness of the times to create this character. So the fictional part was the fun part. To write the fictional part was interesting. The two little girls, that's fictional. I did have two little tuties that I tutored, but they didn't die.
A gumdrop or
No.
whatever.
No. However, I can tell you the origin of that choking on the jawbreaker story, though.
Sure.
Okay, I used to work at Social Security, and this is what writers do. You get your material from wherever you need it. And I worked at Social Security on the hotline in New Jersey. I had a friend who worked there named Dot. She used to give me a ride home, and our ride would take about 40 minutes. During the ride, Dot told me about her children, and one of them was a little girl who had died tragically by choking on a jawbreaker. And this story was so tragic that it took Dot maybe 3 or 4 days to tell me the whole story. Well, at the end of that week, I said, oh my God, I've got to use that story at some point. I can use that story. And so I went back to Dot, who admired my writing. We had a hobby day at work, and we all came and brought what was our hobby. And so I brought a table of workout like this, and Dot was fascinated by it. So I asked Dot, I told her that I was really fascinated by this story, and asked if I could at some point use it. I didn't know exactly how I'd want to use it. And she was more than willing. She said if her death could be meaningful in that way, fine. However, I had to ask her then, can you tell me the story over again? And she was more than willing to, because that's when I learned something about people who go through trauma, including myself. You need to, it's therapeutic to tell your story over and over again.
Yeah.
Over and over again. She gave me far more detail the second time. Far more detail. So, but however, guess what? When I wrote that story about the little girls, I would break down crying every time, because that was the first time that I had somebody die in a story, and I had to revise that about, I don't know, 60 times, whatever. But when I sold it to Viking, the editor there, Amber Qureshi, was wonderful, wonderful editor. She said, we have to go back to the story of the little girls. And I said, why? I thought that was done. I revised it so many times. She said, it doesn't have closure yet. And that's when I had to write the funeral scene. Yeah. So Did that answer?
Sounds like you had a good relationship with the editors. It sounds like you had
It did, but the book got orphaned because that person left, and then a series of editors came along. So it's called an orphan book when that happens, because you don't have somebody who's really fighting, So they bought it with a different set of intentions, but that editor is the one who has to shepherd it through the process. It's all right. I got my foot in the door. I'm so happy I got a book by Viking. I feel like, whoa! For a writer, I won the lottery.
When did the title come to you? Did it come to you like?
Always from the very beginning. I had the title, and it was about the whole being a virgin, and actually when I was a student at San Francisco State, I was a virgin, and I had a boyfriend. No. I was a boy. I had a boyfriend. Okay, we've got to get into it, and we became lovers, but it was a very difficult devirginalization, whatever. Deflowering. It was a difficult deflowering, and we were so communal that everybody knew about it, and it was embarrassing. So okay, enough said. So being a virgin was kind of, it's something that I wished I had gotten rid of long before then, but that wasn't, when I was in high school, as my brother introduced me to a couple of relatives, he said Judy was our Urkel, I said, but I turned into Stefan,
I love hearing the thing about like being a poet makes you good at this, makes you able to do this and able to do that. I totally believe that. And I'm thinking about like the nature of your narration. It's like there's a lot of really quick humor and a lot of fragmented expression, like sentence fragments as ways of saying things, and it just like it has that sort of like the information comes through, but the reader has to understand how one expression relates to what became before it and what comes next. It's not all just like all seamlessly delivered, and it's an active reading experience that's very awakening and involving, I think. And it's fast and funny because of that in some ways too.
I had a play on called Theodicy, Theodicy, and one of the actors who was in it, who had been in several other plays of mine, said the same thing. She said, "Oh, I forgot. Judy plays word games. You have to follow the language throughout, in order to get it, how it's popping from one place to another." So that's what I was used to as a child. I grew up, and I think many families are like this. I grew up in a family like I described in here, a family with all sorts of people, people who were very middle class, bourgeois, made money, worked hard, the kind of professionals that are in Song of Solomon. Anybody read Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison? And you know those real driven, I always said I could never believe the Bill Cosby, Cliff Huxtable doctor, because the ones that I saw, they worked their tails off, and they really kind of were sour, because they had to work so hard, and for, relatively, they weren't getting rich, they were just living well. But so we had those kind of people in the family, career diplomats in the State Department. Then we had gamblers, hustlers. It was all there. So at a family reunion, I'm hearing everything. And because I have an ear for dialogue and because I'm a listener, believe it or not, I was taking it all in. And I still love, I don't like being in a place where only one kind of, one something is going on. In my house, I had a person come to visit me, and she said, Judy, this is a very interesting place to visit, but I would be driven nuts by this because, I have lots of color, lots of books, lots of things around because I need a lot of stimulation. So that's part of, what this is. And people are different. When I was going through my MFA program, Raymond Carver was the god, and everybody wanted to write like Raymond Carver. And everybody tried to write like Raymond Carver except for little me,
Didn't it come out a few years ago that he didn't even write, like Gordon Lish, like co-wrote?
Edited
like all the
stuff.
most celebrated stuff
Yes.
of his, he actually had to get like radically changed by Gordon
Yes,
Lish.
yeah.
It's also a really intimate narration. It's not Janice talking to us, but we're in her head, and like we get to. It's like she's confiding in us.
You know what the editor at Viking said when she told me she decided to buy the book? She said, I had, several stacks of novels, but I kept looking at Virgin Soul, and I felt like that person in that novel was really fighting to be heard.
Yes.
She was fighting, and she said none of the others had that fight in them. I thought that was so interesting, So, there you go.
Can I ask one real question here? When you're so in touch with like what's going on, the stuff that gets reported in the world of journalism, I guess I'm saying now as well as in the period that Virgin Soul takes place. How do you, or do you feel like writing is something like that your creative work is separate from that the social stuff that's going on? The socio-political human rights situation?
No, I don't think it's separate. I think that's why journaling is so important, because you're keeping your record, and your record is your response to all these issues that are going on. I wrote a short story. Is it here? What's that short story? It's somewhere, but it was in the Crab Orchard Review. Okay, got published in the Crab Orchard Review. I tried to leave some of the heavier ones at home, but it's called The Hand, and it's set in New Jersey, and it's about a reporter who's going through a divorce, and she gets on a train going to the Jersey Shore just to chill out. She's not going to the shore, but everybody else is. So at one point, she remembers being in the newsroom when the reports started coming through about the Guyanese killings, the Jim Jones killings, and she was in the newsroom, as I was, all evening long, because that's when I used to be able to be there and work, and my ex-husband could take our kid, and so I would work double shifts or do whatever I had to do. So I was there, Judy, I was there the whole night when the reports, first 15 people, committed suicide, then 30 people, and it kept building all night until it was 800 people. It was the most shocking thing. So I put that in the story, that this woman going through her divorce felt like that, like she's having to repeat, because when you go through a divorce, it's not just you and the husband. You have to tell everybody in the family, all the children, all the relatives. It's just like you have to relive the pain over and over and over again. So you bring that in. So during my MFA program with Molly Giles was was one of my instructors. She's a very wonderful writer and short story writer, and she used to be at San Francisco State. She's retired now. But I learned from Molly. She said, put everything in your daily life in your writing. And I write from a historical standpoint. I love to write. I love to go back 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 102 years, so forth. She said, you put what's in your daily life in there. She said, trust, your worldview. Trust your instincts. Trust what's going on in your gut, that it's going to be a part. It's going to be a holistic thing. So in that sense, there's no separation. And I want to stay alive to what's going on in the world. That's one of my wishes, to stay mentally alert till the day I die. My dad stayed mentally on top of it till his last moment, even though he was very sick. My mom had Alzheimer's for pretty much over a decade, last part of her life. So, pays your money, it takes your choice, as they say.
Well,
Yeah.
I have to leave in a few minutes to go to another class, so I want to sneak my question in before. But I just want to know, how do you balance the time between teaching and writing? Because I think that's the biggest, with our grading load and then carving out time at home to write.
Okay, so have you ever heard of Toy Derricott? She's a poet. So anyway, she's the founder of Cave Canem.
Oh, yes.
Yes, yeah. So she was my mentor and my master poet in the schools when I worked as a poet in the schools in New Jersey. So Toy taught us how to handle being both a poet or a writer and a teacher going into the schools. And one of her keys was do all of your work for school on site. Do it on site. So people who know me from teaching here know that they would often catch me in the classroom for hours afterwards. I would just finish it up here. I taught the Saturday class for 13 years, loved it, teaching the 3-hour or 4-hour 9 to 12 or 9 to 1 class. And that's how I got to know Terrence so well, because Terrence and I used to be next to each other. And in a sense, he was my protector, because I would always stay in the classroom. I would bring my lunch, and I would stay in the classroom from 1 until 5, maybe 5:30, and he would be doing his work there also. And then that way I'd get everything ready, and it would all be done, and I could leave with a clear mind. I've done my work, then I can go and do my other work. So for me, having a clear separation is very important. Sometimes I break the line, but generally not. And the other thing I learned was, I don't know. Okay, I had a office mate here, and she would say, "Oh, I'm spending 30 hours a week correcting these students' papers." And then I would look at what she was doing, and she was writing enormous corrections throughout the paper. I don't do that, okay? What I do is I have editing workshops in class. First of all, I got tired of being the messenger of bad news, okay? So instead of doing that, I devised a way to have students learn how to edit their own papers. So I have common errors. We go over common errors on the board, and then I want you to correct those common errors on this paper. And this works with students who come in half an hour late, an hour late. We're in an editing workshop. Let's sit down, let's do it. You're going to correct your own paper. Now that we have more access to the computer rooms and computers sometimes in our classrooms, I can even just say, bring in your flash drive or your Google Doc or whatever, and we're going to work on your paper. So they bring in the first paper, the final draft, and I put what I call the mark of the devil on it, which means you did get it done, you did bring it in. And then I want you to work on this and pull out a fresh copy for me. You know, that's teaching the students how to edit their own paper. Why should I spend 30 hours doing it for maybe a good half of the students who are going to toss it? You know, she gave me a C-. They're going to be mad. I've had students ball up the paper in front of me and throw it on the, one student did that about 2 semesters ago. She threw it on the floor. And also, I graded essays for 8 years as a second job for ETS, Educational Testing Service. You've worked there for this. I learned so much through grading TOEFL papers. I learned it made me a much better teacher. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know it because I just did it for the money at first, and then I realized, wow, I'm really learning how to spot characteristic errors. You know, so if you can spend a lot of time or a little time putting together a characteristic error sheet, or you can pull them down off the internet and help students learn how to spot their own redundancy, their own, pronoun problems. That really helps tremendously. Let them do a lot of that work themselves, you know. And then also rough drafts. Rough drafts tremendously help. I give, Chris knows, Chris, our chair, I give 40 to 50% of the grade on rough drafts. And I don't even grade the rough drafts. I just, again, put the mark of the devil on them. 2 things. That's to help students get their work in, start on their work earlier. You know, the rough draft is due probably a week or even 4 classes before the final draft is due. Okay? And it gets them getting in contact with their ideas. And then oftentimes, if they have a rough draft, I say bring it in during the office hour. I'll go over it with you during the office hour. But really, it's just enough to get them writing beforehand. And also, once they know that the rough draft counts for so much and it's not being graded, they actually utilize that time and they come up with better papers, you know. So it's just making teaching more efficient, you know, and not treating my students like kids. I joke with people and say, tell them how Chris told us, and don't call the students kids, you know. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm 70 years old. These are kids to me, you know. I am getting out of thinking of them as kids and thinking of them as students, you know. I mean, I have a tender feeling towards them because they're young, and I know, oh my gosh, they're about to go through life, you know, with all of its ramifications. Yeah.
Did I say it just like that?
Well, you never say it just like that, but that's how I take it. Yeah.